August 1st, 2013. These are drawings. They're not actual pictures because they didn't have a way to take them back then, but this was what was called Comet BIiela, B-I-E-L-A, or Comet BIiela. The technical name was Comet, or was 3D BIiela. Now, the history goes back into 1826 on this comet. The reason I'm doing this because it was a comet of the century, the way that ISON has been predicted to be. And I'll tell you what, after seeing Lovejoy and what we saw from that comet, I'm highly anticipating seeing Comet ISON, to say the least. One thing I want to say about Lovejoy, guys, is most and in the last video where I read the NASA report, they talked about a dirty ice ball and things like that. Some solar objects may be. Lovejoy was not one of them because it had the capacitant effect throughout the journey. As we watched it, I'm talking about by the hour. We were tracking that thing, if you guys remember, Christmas 2011, and it was arcing like a light bulb. It was an electric comet now, and they've studied these things with different probes and different satellites, and some have metal. They are not, with that tail they thought was ice blowing out and melting and creating the long tails. With Lovejoy, it was not, that tail was not created by ice. It was created by electrical particles hitting the metallic comet. It got brighter as it went around the sun. It did not dissolve and melt away the way a dirty ice ball would, and as it came out, it became brighter and brighter. And if guys, if you'll look back, I'm not sure if any of those videos are still up or not, but somewhere they're probably linked. But the way all the charts that we were watching on the Artist IMG with the flare tracker and all the proton electron charts just peaked that entire week. Everything was peaked out electrically on all the solar instruments, everything, all the satellites. Never seen them all rise and just hang that high. And they stayed that way till that comet faded back in a distance far enough away to let them come back down. It was an electric comet, and we don't know exactly the makeup of ISON. It's a very interesting thing that we saw a lot of comments on the live Comet ISON thing today that we linked on the video before this. But anyway, this comet BIiela, or BIiela, it says it was discovered in 1826 by Wilhelm von BIiela. That's who they named it after. It said it's become known as Comet BIiela, or Biela's Comet. The comet was first seen in 1772 by Charles Meissner, and again in 1805 by Jean-Louis Pons. It was von Biela who discovered it in 1826, and its perihelion approach on February 27th, and calculated its orbit, discovering it to be a periodic comet with a period of 6.6 years, which is why it was named after him and not Meissner or Pons. It was only the third comet at that time found to be periodic, after the famous comets of Halley and Comet Encke. Now, after that, a French astronomer calculated the path and announced that on the next return of the comet would cross the orbit of the Earth within 20,000 miles of its track, and about 1 month before the Earth would arrive at the same spot. Now, when he did that, people started talking about that it could possibly hit the Earth, or debris hit the Earth, and they were crops were being neglected, wheels were being made out, insurance premiums were payable in advance for if you had a special comet insurance. I'll link to the story. It's going to take forever if I go through all of it. But anyway, it said when the comet came in 1832, the Earth did indeed miss it by 1 month. It returned again in 1839 and 1846. In its 1846 appearance, the comet was observed to have broken up into 2 pieces. That's what we're seeing, guys. Now, they were not sure what had happened. Now, remember, every 6.6 years, this thing came through our solar system, which is, if you think about it, that's kind of often. Now, if you check it out, at about 3.5 AU, or 3.5 times the distance between the Earth and the Sun, is what's called the frost line or freeze line. And it has broken comets up before, is that the temperature changed as it's getting closer to the Sun. And so they're not sure because they did not see the breakup. Now, the comet did not come again in the next cycle in 1852. 6.6 years later, 1859, it did not show up. In 1866, they couldn't see it. I'm not saying it didn't show up. I'm saying they did not see this. And there may be a reason why, because then they were expecting it again in 1872. Now, what happened was, on the night of November 27th, 1872, night watchers were startled by a sudden and very magnificent display of falling stars or meteors, of which had not been previously forecast. Now, there's speculation now that that was one of these pieces, because it had missed the Earth the last time by just a month. Then they hadn't seen it for 3 cycles because they didn't even see these. It had broken into so many pieces. They had watched for this crossing in September. It did not happen until November, but when you broke that mass up of that comet, and when it was crossing these freeze line every 6.6 years, it was changing its orbit. You think about, you change the mass, you change the velocity, the angle, everything. So it had slowed down. So 2 months after they expected it, this is what happened. Said the meteors were radiating from the part of the sky where the comet had been expected to cross in September. The trajectory was the same as the Earth intersected it, but the velocity was somewhat altered. The American Journal of Science said they fell like snowflakes. Professor Olmsted, a mathematician at Yale University, estimated 34,640 shooting stars per hour. The New York Journal of Commerce wrote that no philosopher or scholar had ever recorded an event like this. These meteorites became known as the Andromedids or the Bielids, and it seems apparent that they indicated the death of the comet. The meteors were seen again on subsequent occasions for the rest of the 19th century, but now have faded away. Now, that's one part of the comet that had been delayed, but again, this thing had split. And there was another event that some of the scientists have looked back and tied to what may have happened to the other side. I want to show you. Now, this is a lithograph of the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. Remember, it was 1872 when they had this big meteorite shower, unprecedented meteorite shower. Now, just before this, let's see, I want to get the dates exact so we can you can check this out. On October 8th through the 10th is when there was a series of fires across the United States that happened almost at the same time, and almost like spontaneous combustion. But the Chicago fire was very deadly, and you've read about it in the first rumors that Mrs. O'Leary's cow had turned over a lantern. That turned out to be false. If you study it, it was just a reporter trying to hype the story. No, as bad as that Chicago fire was, it had killed 300 people. But just up the lake, and in a pattern that I'll show you one of the, it's a kind of one of the maps of where all of this happened at the same time. But it was called the Great Peshtigo Fire of 1871, at the same time that the fire in Chicago started. This one, though, killed 1,200 to 1,500 people, destroyed 17 towns, burned 2,400 square miles in Wisconsin. Now, there was other fires I want to show you. Now, this is showing the 1871 fire, but it occurred on both sides of Green Bay. You can see this. It was the worst and the most deadly fire in the history of the United States. This went on for 3 days as the Earth rotated. It went into Ontario, Canada, guys. The fires were there. Port Huron, Urbana, Illinois, south of Chicago, burned. And this is showing the wind pattern. And there were reports of they found people there with coins melted in their pocket, as like an electrical arc. And when their people were not burned, their clothing was not burned. This map is showing some of the areas around the lake. You can see the Huron fire, the Manistee, Holland. Now, I've been to Holland where they have the windmills there, the old Dutch windmills. Chicago fire, the Prestigo fire here, guys. But there was a reporter back then wrote about this. It was called The History of the Great Conflagration. It says the summer of 1871 had been excessively dry. The moisture seemed to be evaporated out of the air. And on the Sunday above named, the atmospheric conditions all through the Northwest were the most peculiar character. The writer was living at the time in Minnesota, hundreds of miles from the scene of the disasters, and he can never forget the conditions of things there. He says they were parched, combustible, and flammable, furnace-like feeling in the air. That says it was alarming. It felt as if there needed but a match and a spark to cause a worldwide explosion. It was weird and unnatural. I have never seen nor felt anything like it before or since. He said those who experienced it will bear me out in these statements. At that hour, at 9:30 in the evening, this was October 8th, 1871, apparently the same moment at points hundreds of miles apart in 3 different states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Illinois, fires of the most peculiar and devastating kind broke out, so far as we know, by spontaneous combustion. In Wisconsin, on eastern borders in a heavily timbered country near Lake Michigan, a region embracing 400 square miles extended north from Brown County and containing the Prestigi. It said that it was a absolute whirlwind of fire. There were 750 people killed outright, besides great numbers of the wounded, maimed, and burned who died afterward. More than $3 million worth of property was destroyed, guys, and those were at those times. It says at sundown there was a lull in the wind and comparative stillness. For 2 hours there was no signs of danger, but at a few minutes after 9, and by a singular coincidence, precisely the time at which the Chicago fire commenced, the people of the village heard a terrible roar. Now listen to this. It was that of a tornado crushing through the forest. Instantly the heavens were illuminated with a terrible glare. The sky, which had been so dark a moment ago before, burst into clouds of flames. A spectator of the terrible scene says the fire did not come upon them gradually from burning trees and other objects that were windward, but the first notice they had, it was a whirlwind of flame in great clouds from above the top of the trees, which fell upon and entirely enveloped everything. The people inhaled and other objects that were windward, but the first notice they had, it was a whirlwind of flame in great clouds from above the top of the trees, which fell upon and entirely enveloped everything. The people inhaled it, and the intensity of the hot air killed them. Said this is verified by the appearance of many of the corpses. They were found dead in the roads and open spaces where there were no visible marks of fire nearby, with not a trace of burning upon their bodies or clothing. It says at the Sugar Bush, which is an extended clearing in some places 4 miles in width, corpses were found in the open road between fences, only slightly burned, no mark of fire upon them, where they lay as if they had fell asleep. This phenomenon seems to explain the fact that so many were killed in compact masses. They seemed to have huddled together in what was evidently regarded as the moment the safest place. It says other spectators that had said much has been seen of the intense heat. Said of the intensity of the fires which destroyed Prestigo, Minnetonka, Williamsville, etc. But all that has been said can give the stranger but a faint conception of the reality. The heat had been compared to that engendered by flame concentrated on an object by a blowpipe. But even that would not account for some of the phenomena. For instance, we have, like I spoke of earlier, possession of copper scent from the pocket of a dead man in the Prestigi Sugar Bush, which illustrates a point. The sand had been partially fused, but still retained its round form, and the inscription on it was legible. Others in the same pocket were partially melted, and yet the clothing and the body of the man were not even singed. They were saying there that it seemed as if the fiery fiends of hell had been loosened, says, when it came in great sheeted flames from heaven. All right, it was a pitiless rain of fire and sand. The atmosphere was of fire. Some speak of great balls of fire unrolling and shooting forth in streams. The fire leaped over roofs and trees and ignited whole streets at once. No one could stand before the blast. It was a race with death above, behind, and before them. The heat increased so rapidly as things got well afire that when about 400 feet from the bridge in the nearest building, he said, I was obliged to lie down behind a log that was aground in about 2 feet of water, and by going underwater now and then and holding my head close to the water behind the log, I managed to breathe. Now, one of the stories it says at Williamson's Mills in Wisconsin, there was a large but shallow well on the premises belonging to a Mr. Borman. The people, when cut off by the flames and wild with terror and thinking they would find safety in the water, leaped into this well. The relentless fury of the flames drove them into the pit to struggle with each other and die, some by drowning, others by fire and suffocation. None escaped. 32 bodies were found there. They were in every imaginable position, but the contortions of their limbs and the agonizing expressions on their faces told the awful tale. It said the fire suddenly made a rush like the flash of a train of gunpowder and swept in the shape of a crescent around the settlement. It almost impossible to conceive the frightful rapidity of the advance of the flames. The rushing fire seemed to eat up and annihilate the trees. Now, they said they saw a black mass coming toward them from the wall of the flame. It was a stampede of cattle and horses thundering towards us, bellowing, moaning, and neighing as they galloped on, rushing with fearful speed, their eyeballs dilated and glaring with terror, and every motion was in a delirium of fright. Some had been badly burned and must have plunged through a long space of flame in the desperate effort to escape. As by that time the forests were on fire from whatever came down. Now, but again, some believe that was the other part of this comet. Now, that tells you that comet, and they found fragments of different comets around the world, and some in this area, and they were huge balls of metal. They were not ice. You could see where they were pitted like a meteorite, but more and more evidence has pointed towards this. And again, some of the scientists today think that's just what happened. And the reason I wanted to go here is because as we watch ISON come in, and it comes around the sun, it rises back on November 28th, we'll see it slingshot around the sun. As it comes over Earth, it will be so high at that point that we should not get any debris from it, guys. But what's going to happen now, on January 15th, 2014, that would be 6 weeks after that, we're going to go through the trail where it came into the solar system, and it was not that far above Earth at that point. Now, something amazing about this old comet that they haven't seen in over 150 years is that they have placed it into a JPL model, and I want to show you that. Now, I was surprised to see this, but I'm glad it's there. Now, they entered it into the JPL models. This is today's date, August 1st, 2013. Now, they haven't seen the comet, like I said, in over 150-something years, or maybe a little longer than that. But they have it here. Now, what you can do is take this thing back to that date. We're going to go back, but I want to show you something here. Here's the alternate orbits, 1832. You see that? Gives you the rest of the information. I'm going to link this page. Now, as soon as the video goes up, you can't link until it goes up, so it takes a few minutes. So just check it out, come back, and but on part 2 you'll have I'll put it on both parts, part 1 and 2, the link to this JPL. It's very interesting to study. But take this thing, and I want you to, you can go in here and set it to say years and go and fast forward, and you can see how fast it's going back. We're going to go back to 1871. Very interesting, because the JPL models show it as if it had continued up. Went a little too far there. Let's back this thing up. Get up to 1862, 3. Or 1871, Chicago fires. Now, they had expected it 1872, but it had broken apart. Okay? Trajectories had changed, paths had changed, and speeds had changed. On August 7th. Now, the fire was on October 8th. So let's go up, change this to days, and let's go to October 7th. October 8th, excuse me. There. Now let's back it out. Let's take a look at what we got. Very interesting. This is showing right here, BIiela. This is the orbit of Mercury, Venus, and Earth. I'm going to pull this up here. Now, if nothing had happened and it come at the expected time, it would have been at close approach to the Earth when they had expected it the next year in 1872, a couple months later. But again, it had broken apart. Things had changed. So this is what we're looking at. Now I'm going to play it forward as it comes in. Right there, unlike Comet ISON that's coming in, it crosses, instead of crossing right over Mars, it comes right in through the path of Earth. And remember, several passes before then it crossed just a month ahead of time before they saw it split. Let me pull this up. But there it goes by, and right there is where Earth crossed its path. Let's back this up. That is, if nothing would have changed. Everything happened early. You see that? It happened, if you go, let's look at this, 6-7 weeks ahead of itself because of that change. And that's what they're speculating on. My point of going here is, could we have this problem with ISON? Now, ISON has crossed the freeze line. We have it, again, at 3.5 AU is the freeze line. That is 3.5 times the distance between the Earth and the Sun. Is it between Mars and Jupiter? It's past that point now. So we're going to be watching it. Again, in ISON will have come through, crossed over Mars, wrapped around the Sun, came back out over Earth before we crossed the first path. And that's going to be a much closer path on the ISON JPL. Let's look at that. Now, this is ISON's JPL, today's date, August 1st. Right now, let's back this down. It is between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter. You see there, here. Now, also notice that the Sun's distance is 2.661 AU, okay? At 3.5 is where it crossed that freeze line that can break them apart. It's just that sudden change. But again, this is not as much made up of gas. We're talking about neutrons and protons and metal and electrons. We saw that with Lovejoy. But I want to pull it up and I want to show you what I'm talking about on January the 15th. All right, if you're on Earth now, here, ISON is at a higher elevation and between Mars and the Sun, if you could see it, okay? Not as far as Jupiter, it's inside that line. As it comes in, it's coming over Mars. It's kind of high above it right there. November 3rd is when it's going to cross over the path of Earth. Now we're going to come up into January 15th. There. That's when Earth would be the closest to any debris trail And like I said, the incoming path of ISON is much higher. You see that? Above, or excuse me, the outgoing path is much higher above Earth. Now, again, if it's split up around this, if you looked at the space.com, if you watched that with us this afternoon, they were talking about as it comes around that sun, it's going to be changing in mass, direction, speed. The path is going to change. This is the projected path over Earth. And notice it comes right over Earth, as you've seen in our other videos. But they're saying today that that's going to change. We're going to be watching this, guys. It's a heads up. Be safe.